The cops showed up at my door because I moved boxes. I'm not kidding. My psycho HOA president Melissa called 911 on moving boxes. When Officer Carter saw my wife's army patch and whispered, "Wait, is that Ghost Viper?" Both women went dead silent. I had zero clue what that meant, but their faces told me everything had just changed. You know that feeling when you think you've got life figured out and then boom, reality slaps you across the face? That's exactly what happened on our moving day. I'm Austin, 34 years old, and up until 3 hours ago, I thought my biggest problem was figuring out where to put our couch. Turns out my wife Rachel is some kind of legendary war hero. And our new neighbor is running a federal crime operation. There I was, hauling boxes like a responsible husband, when this woman appeared out of nowhere. Melissa King, our HOA president. Perfect blonde hair that probably costs more than my monthly salary. Makeup applied with surgical precision. This smile that screams, "I'm about to make your existence miserable." She's got this whole suburban dictator vibe going on, complete with clipboard and attitude. Rachel was carrying work boxes, totally normal cybersecurity stuff for defense contractors. Nothing exciting, just computer files and technical documentation. But these boxes had official labels that said Northrop Grumman Defense Systems and Contractor Cybersecurity Materials. Standard corporate stuff you'd see at any tech company. But when Melissa spotted those labels, something incredible happened. Her face went from suburban smugness to absolute terror in about 2 seconds. I'm talking full-body panic response. She started pacing frantically on her manicured lawn, making agitated gestures while staring at our boxes like they contained her deepest secrets. Any normal person would walk over and say, "Hey, welcome to the neighborhood." But Melissa decides to lose her mind completely. She marches up and starts this unhinged rant about unauthorized military materials, security protocol violations, and threats to community safety standards. I'm thinking, lady, these are cardboard boxes containing computer files, not nuclear launch codes. Rachel just stands there with supernatural calm, holding a box while her old army medic patch is clearly visible on her laptop bag. She's trying to explain politely that it's routine cybersecurity work. Nothing classified or dangerous. But Melissa's not listening to reason. She's operating on pure panic. This woman actually calls the police on moving boxes on our own property. I'm standing there thinking she just dialed 911 because we're unloading a truck in our driveway. The audacity was mind-blowing. She tells the dispatcher about suspicious military materials and potential security threats to children. Meanwhile, we're just trying to get our stuff inside before dark. Officer Carter arrives about 20 minutes later and immediately the whole situation changes. This guy's got perfect cop energy, professional, approachable, clearly experienced with handling neighborhood disputes. He walks over to us first, probably because we look like the same parties in this suburban standoff. Carter glances at Rachel's laptop bag, and I watch his eyes focus on that faded military patch. It's just an old army medic patch from her service days. Small, worn, nothing that would catch most people's attention. Then something magical happens that I'll never forget. Carter's entire professional demeanor completely transforms. His standard police officer posture melts into something deeper, more personal, almost spiritual. He's staring at Rachel with this expression I can't adequately describe. Part shocked recognition, part overwhelming disbelief, part something that looks like he's witnessing a miracle. His voice gets quiet and shaky when he whispers, "Ma'am, it can't be you." Like he's just seen someone rise from the dead. Rachel hears those words and her face goes white as paper. She knows exactly what he means. And I'm standing here like a complete idiot with zero understanding of what's happening between them. Melissa hears this exchange and starts demanding detailed explanations about federal security protocols and government background investigations. But Carter stopped paying attention to her complaints. He's focused entirely on Rachel with this look of profound respect that's honestly uncomfortable to witness as an outsider. Rachel whispers back, "Helmand Province, March 15, 2016. Carter nods slowly like she's just confirmed something he's dreamed about for years. The emotion in that moment was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Melissa's getting more agitated because she doesn't understand what's happening, but she can sense that something important is shifting away from her control. That's when Carter pulls Rachel aside and tells her something that made my knees weak. "Your wife," he says to me with his voice full of emotion, "held my wife Amy when she died in Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Amy Carter, Helmand Province, 7 years ago." He looks at Rachel like she's an angel who fell from heaven. "You gave her peace in her final moments when I couldn't be there." The weight of that revelation hit me like a freight train. My wife, my quiet computer-fixing wife who gets nervous ordering pizza over the phone, had been a combat hero who saved lives and comforted dying soldiers. She'd held this man's wife during the worst moment of his life and made it bearable. Carter whispers to Rachel, "7 years ago in Helmand Province, you held my wife Amy as she died. But here's what I need to know, why is Melissa King so terrified of military connections that she'd call cops on a veteran moving boxes?" His eyes narrow as he watches Melissa pacing frantically. What is she really hiding? The next morning, Carter came by off-duty to share Amy's complete story. We're sitting in our barely furnished living room with moving boxes serving as makeshift furniture. This seasoned police officer is getting completely choked up, talking about losing his wife 7 years ago in a war zone. Staff Sergeant Amy Carter was a communications specialist with the Army. Killed instantly when their convoy hit a massive improvised explosive device during a routine patrol through Helmand Province on March 15, 2016. Rachel had crawled through active Taliban gunfire to reach wounded soldiers scattered around the blast crater. According to survivor testimonies, Carter's voice cracked when he described how Rachel held Amy for 43 agonizing minutes while they waited for medical evacuation, whispering prayers and talking about Amy's family, her dreams of starting a foundation for military children, about how proud Carter would be of her dedication. "Amy's final words were specifically about you," Carter told Rachel with tears streaming down his face. "She said, 'Tell that medic she's my guardian angel.' She made dying feel peaceful instead of terrifying." But Carter wasn't just sharing emotional memories. He was building a criminal case using proper police procedures. He'd spent the previous evening accessing legal law enforcement databases to research Melissa's background, and what he found completely explained her panicked response to military contractor boxes. Public marriage records revealed that Melissa was legitimately married to Army Sergeant Thomas King, who died of cancer in November 2019. The tragedy was real, the loss genuine, and her initial survivor benefits were completely legal and deserved. Here's where legitimate grief becomes federal crime. Melissa remarried her ex-husband, David Wilson, in February 2020 and deliberately never reported the change to the Veterans Administration. Under federal law, remarriage voids survivor benefit eligibility unless the new spouse is also a qualifying veteran, which David definitely wasn't. She'd been collecting $1,800 monthly for exactly 48 months while legally married to someone else. That's $86,400 in knowing premeditated federal fraud. But it gets worse. Carter showed me his research notes, all obtained through completely legal police channels. Melissa had been using her HOA president position to investigate new residents through housing applications, specifically identifying military families, then systematically targeting them with harassment campaigns designed to drive them away before they could settle in and potentially notice inconsistencies in her Military Widow Act. The Williams family in 2021, Army backgrounds, harassed until they sold their house. The Smith family in 2022, Navy connections, driven away through impossible violations. The Johnson family in 2023, Marine heritage, forced to relocate after mysterious code infractions. This wasn't random neighbor cruelty or typical HOA power trips. This was calculated predatory behavior designed to protect ongoing criminal activity. Melissa was eliminating potential witnesses who might have federal connections. Necessary to expose benefit fraud. She'd turned community leadership into organized crime. Carter revealed the most chilling aspect of Melissa's systematic targeting. She waited until military families were emotionally vulnerable, then struck with maximum damage, new arrivals during stressful moving periods, families dealing with active deployments overseas, veterans struggling with reintegration or PTSD treatment. She studied their weak points like a predator studying prey. Rachel listened to all this with growing determination. She'd spent 7 years building a peaceful civilian life, trying to forget combat trauma and war memories. And this neighborhood dictator had dragged her back into conflict. But I could see something changing in her expression: cold analytical focus, military precision thinking. Melissa had accidentally awakened skills that had been dormant since Rachel's honorable discharge. The irony was incredible. Melissa thought she was protecting her fraud by targeting military families, but she just declared war on someone who understood tactical planning, strategic thinking, and systematic problem-solving under extreme pressure. Rachel started asking Carter detailed questions about HOA financial procedures, public record accessibility, and federal investigation protocols. Carter explained his next steps in the investigation process. He'd filed the official VA fraud report through proper law enforcement channels, which would trigger a comprehensive audit of Melissa's benefit claims, financial records, and marriage history. The federal bureaucracy moves slowly but thoroughly, he warned us. 6 to 8 weeks minimum before they contact her for mandatory interviews. Those 6 weeks of waiting felt like the longest month and a half of my existence. Rachel handled the mounting stress with typical military discipline, but I could see the toll it was taking. She'd wake up at exactly 5 a.m. to check for new violation notices that Melissa inevitably left under our door during overnight stealth missions. Melissa's harassment campaign during this period was absolutely relentless. Our mailbox was allegedly improperly positioned. Our trash containers were supposedly placed 14 inches beyond acceptable boundary limits. Our outdoor light fixture suddenly became non-compliant with architectural standards despite being identical to every other house on the block. Each violation notice came with substantial fines ranging from $50 to $500. But Melissa didn't realize Carter had been conducting his own comprehensive investigation using proper police procedure. He'd been talking to neighbors during regular patrol rounds, asking carefully casual questions about their experiences with HOA leadership and any unusual incidents they'd witnessed. The crucial breakthrough came when Mrs. Thompson, our 72-year-old neighbor with an elephant's memory for community gossip, mentioned something she'd never considered important. At a community barbecue in September 2020, she'd clearly overheard Melissa complaining loudly about her absolutely impossible ex-husband, David, and the messy divorce proceedings complicating her financial situation. 6 months later, Melissa was publicly claiming to be a grieving military widow whose husband had died heroically overseas. Carter's database searches confirmed Mrs. Thompson's memory with documentary precision. Public marriage records showed that Melissa King divorced David Wilson in August 2019, married Thomas King in October 2019, became a legitimate military widow when Thomas died in November 2019, and then remarkably quickly remarried David Wilson in February 2020. During this investigation period, Rachel was conducting her own completely legal research using basic internet resources and public record searches. She found David Wilson's social media profiles clearly showing his marriage to Melissa in 2020, complete with wedding photos and anniversary celebrations. She compiled everything methodically, creating an airtight timeline that exposed Melissa's lies and systematic targeting. The community slowly started turning against Melissa as evidence of her deception spread through normal neighborhood gossip. People began remembering specific details they'd previously ignored, like how Melissa never displayed any military honors from Thomas's supposed combat service, or how her deployment stories contained basic factual errors that any real military spouse would never make. Melissa's response to growing community suspicion was to escalate her harassment campaign against us to increasingly desperate levels. She filed additional violation notices for infractions that bordered on official harassment. Our welcome mat was inappropriately placed on our own front porch. Our garden plants were non-compliant species despite being identical to approved plants in other yards. Our garage door was improperly maintained because it had a tiny scuff mark. The federal agents arrived on a Tuesday morning that felt like the calm before a Category 5 hurricane. I was drinking coffee when I spotted the unmarked government sedan pulling up directly to Melissa's house. These weren't social workers coming to check documentation. These were federal investigators with badges, guns, and the legal authority to make people disappear into the criminal justice system for decades. Melissa must have been watching from her front window because she answered the door before the agents could even knock. From our living room window, I could clearly see her gesturing frantically and talking rapidly in obvious panic mode, probably trying to maintain her composure while her entire criminal empire crumbled in real time. The lead investigator was this absolutely no-nonsense woman in a dark suit who looked like she'd heard every possible excuse and believed exactly none of them. She handed Melissa some official paperwork and started asking pointed questions that clearly weren't going in the direction Melissa had hoped. They weren't just asking standard questions about survivor benefit eligibility. The investigators kept referring to thick folders and making detailed notes about issues that clearly went far beyond simple benefit verification. They had charts, timelines, financial records, and what looked like surveillance photographs. This wasn't a routine audit. This was a comprehensive criminal investigation that had been building for months. Later that afternoon, Melissa hired expensive legal representation. $8,000 upfront for a federal criminal defense attorney who specialized in white-collar crime and government fraud cases. The lawyer arrived in a luxury Mercedes and spent over 3 hours at Melissa's house. When he finally left, his grim facial expression and defeated body language suggested the legal news wasn't remotely positive. The VA investigator contacted Melissa for her mandatory in-person interview, and apparently the meeting didn't go well. Carter heard through official law enforcement channels that Melissa couldn't provide adequate documentation to support her continued benefit claims under serious federal scrutiny. When directly questioned about her current remarriage status, she claimed she simply forgot to notify the appropriate federal agencies. Federal investigators don't accept "I forgot" as a legally valid defense for $86,400 in deliberately fraudulent benefit claims over multiple years of systematic deception. The evidence clearly showed intentional concealment and deliberate criminal behavior, not accidental oversight. The investigation's scope expanded far beyond simple benefit fraud when federal agents discovered Melissa's HOA financial irregularities during their standard background verification process. They discovered inflated contractor payment schemes, questionable memorial fund expenditures that never resulted in actual community improvements, and violation fine collections that mysteriously didn't match official HOA budget reports. The conspiracy charges revealed everything was way bigger than any of us had imagined. Melissa hadn't been working alone. She'd been actively coordinating with other HOA presidents across 3 different counties to share targeting strategies, fraud techniques, and methods for systematically exploiting community leadership positions for personal profit. When Melissa's expensive criminal defense lawyer delivered devastating news about federal conspiracy charges and potential decades in prison, she made the absolutely worst possible decision: completely reject the government's plea bargain offer and fight all charges publicly through community support and character witness testimony. She demanded an emergency HOA meeting to completely clear her name and expose the coordinated conspiracy against innocent civilians. The emergency community meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening and word spread through our neighborhood like wildfire. 26 neighbors showed up, which was an absolute record for our usually completely apathetic community participation. Melissa arrived dressed like she was attending a major political rally, complete with a "Support Our Troops" pin that would have been absolutely hilarious if it weren't so offensively ironic. She launched her desperate presentation by directly attacking Rachel's character, military background, and current civilian status. "We have a genuinely dangerous individual living in our peaceful community," Melissa announced dramatically. "Someone with suspicious military connections who's been systematically accessing private information through sophisticated computer crimes and government database hacking." But Carter was completely ready for her manipulation tactics. He stood up calmly with his official police documentation and methodically destroyed every single accusation she'd made. He patiently explained how public records databases function, how completely legal information searches work, and how federal fraud investigations operate. Then he told the entire room about Amy Carter's heroic death and Rachel's distinguished military service as Ghost Viper, the legendary combat medic who had saved 23 soldiers' lives in Afghanistan through extraordinary courage under intense enemy fire. The emotional weight of Carter's testimony immediately shifted the entire room's energy away from Melissa's manipulation attempts. Frank presented his accumulated documentation of Melissa's systematic targeting pattern against military families over multiple years, photographs of bogus violation notices, detailed harassment timeline charts, and financial records clearly showing how veteran families had been systematically driven away from the neighborhood. Mrs. Williams called in remotely from her new home in San Diego to describe in painful detail how Melissa had deliberately hit their family with over $2,000 in bogus violations immediately after their son deployed to Syria. She specifically waited until we were emotionally vulnerable and financially stressed from deployment preparation, Mrs. Williams explained with obvious pain in her voice. That's when Melissa's desperation reached absolute peak levels and her carefully maintained mask completely slipped off. She abandoned her prepared presentation materials entirely and started frantically attacking everyone in the room with increasingly unhinged accusations and paranoid theories. She accused Carter of coordinating a dangerous military conspiracy. She claimed Rachel was using stolen veteran status to commit federal crimes. Her final desperate gambit was playing the professional victim card with over-the-top theatrical emotion. I lost my beloved husband, Thomas, to military service overseas, she sobbed dramatically with fake tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. I've devoted my entire adult life to supporting this wonderful community. And now I'm being viciously attacked by the very same people I've tried so hard to help. But her manipulative performance fell completely flat because literally everyone in that room had either personally experienced her systematic harassment campaigns or witnessed them happening to innocent neighbors over multiple years of targeted abuse. As Melissa finishes her desperate speech to the neighbors, federal agents walk through the community center doors with official badges and arrest warrants. The lead agent looks directly at her and says, "Melissa King." She nods hopefully, thinking they're finally here to arrest Rachel for imaginary crimes. "You're under arrest for federal benefit fraud." But as the handcuffs click around her wrists, the agent adds something that makes everyone gasp, and will be investigating your co-conspirators throughout the region. The arrest happened in front of 26 neighbors. Watching a federal takedown in a suburban community center is something you never forget. Melissa's face went through every single stage of grief in approximately 30 seconds, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally hollow acceptance that her life was permanently over. The formal charges read aloud were extensive and devastating: survivor benefit fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit federal fraud across state lines, filing false federal reports, and abuse of fiduciary duty related to her systematic misuse of HOA authority for personal criminal gain and community exploitation. 6 months later, the federal courthouse downtown became the stage for Melissa's final act. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, veteran families, and media covering what Orange County had already named the suburban HOA fraud scandal. Melissa was sentenced to 30 months in federal prison with no possibility of parole, $118,000 in restitution, penalties and legal fees, and 5 years of supervised probation. But the financial punishment was minor compared to her social destruction. Her adult children publicly disowned her before the trial. Her son's viral post declared, "Melissa King's criminal actions don't represent our family's values." The judge added a hate crime enhancement for targeting military families. "Mrs. King, you identified and harassed families based on their service, exploiting sacrifices made for your freedom," he said. "This court finds your actions particularly reprehensible." The ripple effects spread far beyond her case. Federal investigations into HOA fraud led to arrests in 3 other counties. Melissa's co-conspirators faced charges for a conspiracy that had run for 6 years. The neighborhood transformation was complete, military families felt safe and welcome, veteran support programs operated with proper oversight, and Rachel and Carter had become close friends bonded by their shared connection to Amy's memory. As I finish this story, Rachel walks in with news that our ordeal might not be completely over. Austin, I just got a call from someone in San Diego. They had an HOA president using the exact same military widow scam, targeting veterans with identical harassment techniques. They want to know if Ghost Viper would help expose their fraud too. That's a story for another day. Thanks for joining us here at the HOA Defender. If this wild ride of suburban justice hit the spot, smash that like button. I'm Austin and I'll catch you in the next video where we dive into even crazier neighbor drama.